Thanks very much, Tumi. It has been an enlightening journey. It always is with Ben and the team. So maybe we can switch over. And what I'm going to do is just really, Tumi set the scene very well, so I'm not going to go through too much on it, other than to say that the personal mission that I've gone into this game with is to try and get enough information together so that we can start repricing real assets and effectively pricing impact and adaptive spend. I know there's a valuer in the room, there's probably more than one, but generally valuers are quite happy to price real assets or the impact of ESG and that sort of spend through the cash flows, but I'm looking to gather enough information that we can actually re-rate these assets based on the risk rates, particularly the exit cap rate. So while we're building this for alt cap, our alternative agenda is to get more and more information so we can ultimately get the risk rates adjusted to reward adaptive spend and social and impact allocations of capital. So I'm going to show you first up. I'll just show you. I'm actually going to show you the tool that we're talking about, and then we'll look at what else there is on the. Right. Hold on a second. Okay. Very simplistically, we've built basically a data integrator, and the integration tool is built on two key technologies. The first is data fabric. So what we're able to do there is integrate multiple sets of disparate data into a single version or a single version of the truth. In this particular case, we're streaming directly from the primary property management system, which is MRI. So we're not taking that data and holding it on an annual or a quarterly or a monthly basis or a daily basis. We're actually streaming directly from MRI system. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. The other technology we're using is called Knowledge Graph. Show of hands if anyone knows what I'm talking about. Fantastic, so I can say whatever I want. Right, so Knowledge Graph, the best way to explain it is effectively a Facebook for data. So what it does is it understands the relationships between data points without you having to necessarily code for it. So in our case, if we see CNA and it's spelled C.N.A, or we see CNA and it's C-N-A, it'll immediately connect that it's the same tenant and therefore allow us to start building data around that relationship. Anyway, okay, so those are the two texts we've built on. What you're looking at here is effectively a portfolio summary. We've got a sequence of around 11 different dashboards. And the secret to the system, to me, is that we actually don't want to just overwhelm asset managers or users with data. We want to specifically look to what is the question that's been asked or what is the decision that's being made. So in this particular instance, all we're looking at here is a very clear portfolio summary. And if I go and I change the date, so let's say, for example, we want to go to the year to date. We then have the portfolio data, and we can look at outstandings as a percentage of billing and so on. Now, I want to reiterate, because I think that's why we've taken so long to get this, we are pulling this data directly from MRI, so it's live. Vicky, when we talk, that's the fun part. Okay, we have like I said, we've got a couple of summaries. So in this particular instance, we're looking at portfolio and tenant. We can look at the portfolio locations, and very particular, Ben, to your question around how many deals have you looked at? Well, in this respect, we collect all of the rejected assets that have gone through the IC or gone through DealCom, so we never throw any information away. And the reason for that is at some stage we could well revisit some of these assets. So what you can see on the top left is your rejected deals, which comes in at around 870,000 square meters of space that you've turned. Yeah, it's square meters, Ben, not number of deals. And then what we do is we effectively follow the team's process. So the rejected ones that move past an immediate rejection to not approved, and then those that were approved at IC but then decided for whatever reason they weren't going to move forward any further. We don't have any in deal com, we don't have any currently in investment com, and then we've got a couple that are transfer pending, and obviously the portfolio that's transferred. So all of this information is available on call, and you can then download the information and manipulate it any way you want. So if you're expecting a sort of a global, international type dashboard, that isn't what we're trying to do here. We're looking to create a dashboard of data that declutters the data market, but provides essential information for decisions to emerging managers at a price point that emerging managers don't feel that they completely can't afford it. So, and that's what we've done with Ben and the team. So that's the portfolio summary. If you wanted to have a look at portfolio operating fundamentals, again, I've just set the dating here for to the current date, depending on what's pulling through from MRI. But if we then go back to, let's say, 2025, last quarter, we can get new data through based on, so this would be looking at your portfolio category profile by area. We can also start looking at your tenant information. So when we start talking about leasing, what is your exposure? This is running to the end of July. I could run it through to the end of March. I could actually almost run it through to end of October based on what you've currently got in the system. This will look at your top 10 tenants by rent remaining. It'll look at your top 10 brands by rent remaining. It could look at your exposure to your merchandise categories. Once again, this is all feeding directly from live data, so it's streaming. Tenant exposure, so not just the tenant summary, but if we're looking again at some of the stuff, we would love to be able to incorporate Belinda's benchmarks. We have your tenant exposure. And once again, none of this data is our data. It's all Tumi's and the team's data. And the fact is that once we establish who the benchmark is going to be, or provider is going to be, we then replicate that semantic layer. We make sure that we have the right language so that we're comparing like for like, and we can bring those benchmarks in and actually start driving decisions. On the lease and trading side, very similar sort of data. We're looking at lease renewal summaries. We're looking at vacancy summaries. We're looking at lease expiry summaries to talk to that proactive conversation you were having earlier. And then, of course, we looked at the retail trading metrics. Unfortunately, Waseema, you probably will get the question. We don't have a lot of turnover data from a lot of the tenants, but the fact is that the base is there, and we've already included it. So as that data rolls in, we'll be able to start doing the retail trading metrics. This is looking, as an example, at your lease expiry summary. So what leases are coming up, and which months, and by that looks at per month, and then we can look at it GLA if you wanted to. So that's a very quick run through of what the team has done, what the team has built. Any specific questions on that? No? Wow, easy crowd. Okay. So the next one I'd like to demonstrate is a tool that we eventually are going to be, as with all of these sets of data that are informing decision making by the team, we're looking to integrate into a single view. So with regards to I call it ESL. For those of you who don't know, I've been doing sustainability strategy consulting for 5 years. The governance word tends to get thrown around a little bit too much, so I call it leadership. And in the case of property and particularly real estate, I think that leadership risk or leadership opportunity is probably more of a potential opportunity than just talking about governance. No disrespect to the compliance people in the room. Okay, so what we've got here is effectively a tool that starts to look at how we can use new data, new technology to understand our assets a little bit better. What we're also looking to do here is to try and understand how we can incorporate some of those factors that we know about as in environmental, social, and leadership into our investment decision making. So it's part and parcel of the same decision process. Very simplistically, what we're looking at here is Amsterdam Plaza. We have your traditional catchment areas. Oops, hold on. So So for those of you that understand catchment areas, you'll see that we've got our primary and our secondary catchment areas in the red and the green. And the logical question then is, well, what is that bright, luminescent 1980s line on the screen? And that is what we're calling the next-gen catchment area. And what we're doing there is we're starting to bring in mobility data, which is basically human movement data. For those of you on your apps that often get asked, do you want to tell people where you are? There's a couple of providers around the world that collect this information. And what this has allowed us to do is to move from estimated catchments to really accurate catchment areas. Catchment areas are important in a couple of respects. The first is that it allows you to determine your potential spend. And the more accurate you can get on your potential spend, the better you will be at determining whether your center is performing correctly or not. So in this particular dashboard, one of the things that we're looking at here is a really unusual ratio where we've actually got what we call a catchment strength. So we've got a model where I've gone around to all of my contacts in the industry that own big shopping centers or own a lot of shopping centers, and we've built a catchment model which will look at a couple of factors. It'll look at the demographics, so house counts, house growth. It'll look at your ESG factors. It will look at your property fundamentals, and it'll look at your retail potential. It'll then come up with a catchment strength. Now, as we add data to each of the assets, so that catchment strength will allow us to start comparing assets to assets within the portfolio. So how good are they? How good are the catchment areas? The other thing we've done is that we've established whether there's any potential capital allocation improvements that can come from redrawing your catchment area using more advanced technology, as in the mobility data. In this particular instance, you can see that the next-gen data catchment, which is the mobility data, demonstrates that this particular shopping center is pulling shoppers from way substantially further east than or north than what we thought. And that's particularly along that road. Now, the overflow from this decision is that we can start using that information to understand how we can improve our impact. How can we understand, how do we know more about that community that's sitting in the top of that catchment area that traditionally we never really even considered for this particular asset? And that then starts informing how we localize our impact, but importantly, how we demonstrate a reduced risk for that particular asset. By implication, reduced risk should result in a higher price. My contention, and I believe that Alt Capital is the best example of that, is that smart capital is going to start including environmental, social, and leadership impact in the pricing of assets. When you buy and sell them, that's going to be either a positive or a negative in the price. And ultimately, we'll have the data for Ben and the team to sit in those meetings, or Tumi to sit in those meetings and negotiate around those factors. So this is a very brief or broad explanation of the other tool that we're using, which is the Fernridge. In conjunction with Fernridge, because they do a lot of the analytics for the retailers, and they do a lot of analytics for shopping center owners. So their primary data is particularly good in outlying areas. Okay, well, it looks like energy is low. No questions so far. We could run through each of the assets if you wanted to, but I think we're probably done with that. So what we have here is the catchment area. Don't worry about the little bit going into the sea. For those of you that don't know what mobility data is, essentially what it does, what we're able to do with mobility data is we're able to determine where a phone sleeps. So as in during the time of night when most people are sleeping, we're able to see where that phone is sleeping. We're then able to see where that phone works. So during the normal working hours, where that phone may be. And then for the shopping center, we're able to track that phone directly into the shopping center. And over a period of time, we can then build up a map which shows us where the majority of people that are going into that shopping center have come from, as in where do they sleep or where do they work. And that's the information that you can see on the dark green line. In particular, you can see again how the catchment area for Ekhupumleni moves across to Alexandra. Now, we drove through there when we came through this, which is why it was particularly interesting for me. Now, we have the primary catchment area on the old way of doing it, which is essentially just an estimated drive time. is that little red patch around the center. The secondary area would be the blue, and the tertiary area would be the green. In this particular instance, you can see we have sufficiently understated that catchment area. And what that means from a capital allocation perspective is that we are potentially underestimating the potential spend of that center that should be going to that center, which means that when we do get the turnover data in, we're then able to start working out whether that center can be allocated more capital in order to get bigger, in order to attract or save or solve for that potential spend that should be going towards it. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Oh, that's better.
I had a question on how do you get access to the cell phones for you to map out people's...
We know everything you're doing. No, it's a common approach nowadays. There are very few companies that are doing market research that are not accessing that data. Essentially, every time you access an app, whether you've got Google Earth running or Google Maps running on your Waze or whatever, that information is currently being aggregated at the back in the international markets, and it's being sold as mobility data. So there are providers in the market that are quite, it's fairly standard nowadays for you to be able to access it. The interesting thing, though, is it is tokenized, so it is anonymized. Where it gets really interesting is when you overlay that data with other data. So, for example, the banks are now providing transaction data, aggregated transaction data. Some of them are geocoding that access data, so you're able to see where people are spending their money outside of your shopping center. So we start laying that over the catchment area. We can then start talking to how your tenant mix. They're even talking about adding credit checking data into that, so you can start determining how creditworthy some of your catchment areas may be, which then talks to counterparty risk, or shopper risk, so it's becoming a real science. The point is, though, to build a platform, and this is what I think Alt Capital's done particularly well, is to build a platform that is able to use low velocity data, as in property data, which is generally quite slow, but completely be able to integrate with IoT data and big data such as your foot counts, facial recognition, energy and water usage, and so on. But to have the security platform underneath that data that is equivalent to a banking security system, data security system. So they've been really smart in the way they've done it, even if I do say so myself. Is there another question?
No, I don't. This was more or less the same, so it's been answered.
Yeah, it's fully anonymized, like I said, so you don't have to worry. But it is, so there's a couple of providers, and Belinda's more of an expert on it than I am, I'm sure. But there's a couple of providers in the market, like Fatty, for example, that's probably got around 70 shopping centers that has put the Wi-Fi in, but it's very localized around that shopping center. The secret now is that transaction data has become the real buzzword. Itu and I were having a long chat about it.
So, or is it sort of overestimating the data if one person carries more than one phone?
So it's called pinging. It'll actually ping to shopping. So yes, it'll pick up 2 pings, as if. So yeah, if you'd like to try and flummox the system by walking around with 15 phones, please don't do that. No, but it would. It would. But that's where the value of accumulative data starts really coming through. So the platform is built, the capability is there. Now, as we accumulate data, so we're going to learn much more around and be able to use that data to improve capital allocation decisions. It is not a property management system. We have not built it for that. It's a portfolio management, capital allocation tool. So we're looking to improve capital allocation.
So, Paul, if I ask you to just demonstrate one additional thing, is we've got layers within the...
Thank you.
Show them the layers, please.
I forgot. All right, thanks. No, that would have been a bit silly. Right. So within this, and I talked about integrating impact and ESG factors into your decision-making process. What we have built in at the moment is a couple of fairly simplistic environmental and social factors in the decision-making process. So, as an example, we're collecting data on serious crime. We're looking at social unrest. We're looking at a flood risk index for that particular asset, and we're looking at temperature. Now, those are all built into what we call the catchment strength model number. There's multiple data sets that are available there. We're constantly reviewing those data sets, so we're looking to add to them. We are also at the moment thinking about adding a municipality dysfunctional risk index or data. And that for anyone that's buying property, if you know that the municipality cannot deliver services, why is that asset priced at the same price as a municipality that can? If you spent a lot of money or put an adaptive spend to make sure that you can compensate for the dysfunction of the municipality, why are you not being rewarded for it when you sell that asset? Those are the questions we're looking to answer. So we've added in, as an example, you can see we've added in a flood index. So looking at that particular asset, and the shading will indicate whether there's a high flood risk or not. Let me zoom out. Some of the other layers we've added that would be able to inform very quickly whether there's a real risk in those assets would be fire and hotspots. So is there fire activity potentially in that area? In the Western Cape, it's probably more prevalent or relevant than in the Eastern Cape. We're able to look at whether you're on a protected nature area. So that hasn't come through all that pretty at the moment, but promise you it is there. So once again, these are just giving, those are the wildlife or natural protected areas, and you can see that assets. Again, the big thing with environmental and social risk, specifically looking at financial materiality, is materiality. So are these material risks? Is fire a material risk? Is the fact that you're on a biodiverse area a key risk? And in these particular instances, they're not, and the team can see that straight away before they dig into any additional decisions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Phil. We are just going to take the last two questions, one from Stuart here.
Sure. Thank you, Phil. Quick one. Does the system has the capability to overlay the government census data on the average household income in the area, the demographic, the social demographic standards, and then you can actually determine what is your actual catchment?
It's all in the data.
Is
so
it?
we already have it there. We specifically partnered with Fernridge on this because of the quality of their primary data, where they collect primary information on potential spends. They also have a particular methodology where they do house counts over and above census. And the reason that's important is that we reckon census, particularly in rural areas or in high-density townships, are undercounting houses because of backyards. So they specifically do satellite counts on those to get to a more accurate reflection of growth. And in that, they do the same. We then are able to determine the potential spend. From the potential spend, we've got a ratio that actually converts potential spend to net operating income. So it's a big jump, but how do you convert what's potential spend into pure profit? You use that ratio to then compare your assets to determine how good they are at converting that potential spend into profits, into net profits. The other number that we're using quite extensively on this particular tool is that next-gen catchment potential spend versus historic catchments potential spend. So the old way of doing it might have told you that you had a 4.5 billion rand potential spend. What's the next catchment potential spend? It may be slightly smaller, but because you've brought in new areas, often it'll be your catchment spend potential would be understated, which means you can then allocate more capital, You can probably refer the center. It completely changes the way you make capital decisions, and it's all built in.
Thanks. Maybe just to the old team. So has this data, maybe in hindsight, now that you have it, do you think it would have resulted in you making different portfolio construction or investment decisions if you had had it, at the day one of the fund?
Thanks, Made. So I think as we're building, of course, we're picking up lessons along the way. And the data set itself gets richer the more information we put in it. So right now, we've probably looked at over 100 transactions that are through the platform. And it's looking, all of it contributes to our decision making going forward. So I'd say it's definitely enhancing our ability to look at transactions on a day-to-day basis. So to answer your question simplistically, yes, it certainly would have help us in the initial stages to make our analysis, to enhance the quality of our analysis, yes.
Okay.
Were you asking if we'd chosen different assets? Oh, so I guess the value of it again is the assets that you input into the platform. So there's assets that we haven't looked at all, that we don't know whether we'd be interested in those assets or not. Given the assets that we do own, of course there are lessons throughout. There are mistakes that have been made. There are challenges that each asset has had. So I'd say it would have enhanced our decision-making process, not necessarily changed our decision at the end of the day.